Welcome to another episode of The Next Generation. Today, I have an amazing guest on, you guys. If you didn't already notice from the title of this episode, Jessica Groskopf is on with us today on The Next Generation, and she is going to be talking all things finances. And you know what? As a young producer in agriculture, this is something that I am equally as intrigued to hear all about. And I cannot wait to share with all of you guys in my audience. So, Jessica, I would love it if you could just take it away and tell everyone a little bit about yourself and who you are, what you do, all the sorts of things.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Jessica. I actually live in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, where I work for the University of Nebraska as an extension professional. But outside of my 9 to 5, I'm married to a farmer. And so that's kind of the start of our story.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like just your relationship with being married to a farmer and all of those sorts of things and your guys' kind of history behind that is what started a lot of this passion for sharing about finances and financial literacy amongst farmers and ranchers. I'd love it if you could share a little bit about kind of that journey of being young producers in the industry and coming up and kind of having to learn about finances and in a sense having to learn the hard way and those lights too.
Yeah, so my husband and I got married in 2015, and he's a fourth generation farmer. And at the time, he was farming with his dad and his uncle. So, like many young producers, we were starting to have those conversations with them about what our future would be on the operation. And unfortunately, especially his uncle, really wasn't into that conversation at all. And like many young producers, we kind of hit that wall of not knowing what the path was for us to move forward. And so rather than just kind of sitting and waiting, we took control of what we could take control of, and that was our finances. And we prepared ourselves for that eventual opportunity, whether that was with family or outside of family, to have our own piece of the operation. And so we started saving money, and we saved a lot of money. And what we really found, and where my background comes in, I'm an economist by training, but I work with farmers and ranchers on the business side of their operations all the time. And what I was looking for were flexible accounts that we could put money into without really knowing when we would have to take that money out. And so we started saving and saving and saving. And so that was really kind of my journey down, why aren't farmers and ranchers being taught how to take advantage of these kinds of accounts? So eventually down the road, unfortunately in 2020, actually, the uncle passed away from COVID. And at that point, there was still this unknown because the estate plan was never really fleshed out. And in 2022, we were able to buy out the uncle's heirs. And I can't imagine where we would have been if we hadn't purposely gone after that goal of saving in those flexible accounts so that when that opportunity presented itself, we could do that. We actually did a 7-figure buyout, which at under the age of 40 was extraordinarily scary. But we're now farther down the road. We've been able to manage that debt load. And in fact, that's our only debt that we have. And just really thankful that we took action even when we didn't know what the path ahead of us was. During that process, I always told my husband, it's like playing the game of chess without being able to see the rest of the board. And so we were positioning ourselves in a way that we could really take advantage of that next move and that next move and that next move. And it really now has me fired up to teach others how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is so important, just financial literacy in general in agriculture and things like that. And financial literacy in agriculture looks different than it does for the rest of the world because we are going to take on 7-figure debts sometimes or 6-figure debts or things like that. And those operational debts are different than, a debt on a car payment or a debt on a credit card or things like that. And I think that mainstream media a lot of the times really likes to push that debt is bad, stay away from debt, all of these things. And you know what? And a lot of senses, yes, absolutely stay away from that bad debt, but there is such a thing as good debt. Can you talk a little bit more about that and just kind of like your journey in that?
Yeah, so the first thing that we did was we built an amazing team of professionals that we knew, we liked, and we trusted. And I think it's really important that you know them, you like them, and you trust them. I think a lot of times in small towns, maybe you go to the banker that your dad goes to, or you go to the attorney that's been your family friend forever, and they might not be the right person. So on that team, what we built was an attorney, a tax professional, a banker, a financial planner, an investment advisor, and a life insurance agent. And that's a lot broader than a lot of people think about when they think about their kind of advisory board. But for us, it took all of those professionals to bounce ideas off of and to work with to say, okay, as we're going through this process, can we use a life insurance policy? Can we use a different entity structure? How does this affect us personally from a financial perspective? Can we withdraw the investments that we've made without huge tax implications? And so it really took that whole team of professionals to do that. When you are building your team of professionals, I think there's a few key pieces that we learned when we did that. Number one, they have to speak agriculture. You can go to the attorney in town, and they might be in court one day and dealing with a different type of maybe a divorce the next day, but are they actually dealing in agriculture and understand how it's structured? Do they know what heifers are? Do they know what a culvert is? Do they know those kinds of things? So when you're talking about assets, they get it. When you're interviewing them, I really encourage the first question they should be asking you is, what are your goals? What are your goals? And if they're not asking that, then I don't know that they necessarily have your best interest in mind. So, what is your ultimate goal with X, Y, and Z? The other thing is, are they willing to work with other professionals in town? When we looked at an attorney and a tax professional in particular, having them talk to each other was really, really, really important, because there were times when one was talking about an option and we tried to explain it to the other one and it didn't come off quite right because we didn't know all the ins and outs. So having them just talk directly to each other was huge. And then the last thing is they need to treat you like the CEO of your business. Yes, they're your advisor. Yes, they're an expert in their field, but ultimately that decision is yours. And if they're treating you like a toddler who can't make their own decisions, that's not the right person for you. So when you're building that team, make sure they speak agriculture, they ask you about your goals, they're willing to work with other professionals, and they treat you like the CEO of your business.
Yeah, it's so important to build that team because that building of the advisory board, I guess you could say, of the financial side of your business is so important because you know what, we don't know it all. We may know the next bull that we're going to use or the best genetics in the world or things like that, but if you know all of that, the probability of you knowing all of the financial ins and outs and all of the legal ins and outs and everything like that is very slim as farmers and ranchers. So it's so important that you're building that team alongside yourself.
Well, and it's funny because we're all, we'll all go ask the advice of the veterinarian, or we'll all go ask the advice of the agronomist. But when we walk into the banker's office, we let them tell us what to do. Right.
Yep.
And so that's one of those things where we need to turn the tables a little bit and again, take charge. You can't know everything, but you can understand enough to make the decision. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It is extremely important because at the end of the day, it is your operation. You're going to run it how you're going to run it. And you know what? We may disagree on different ways to run operations or different things like that. But having that advisory board there that can kind of, you know what, not be your friend and be your professional partner of advising you and saying, like, hey, this is a really stupid financial decision. And then your lawyer can be over here like, yeah, and that's maybe not the most legal decision either, or something like that,
Right.
that they can kind of sit there and give you those checks without it having to be family giving you that check or something like that, because dealing with family in these situations can be extremely difficult as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear about kind of like the different accounts that you kind of touched on in the beginning as well. So you were talking about, you know what, saving and all of those things. And I'm sure you guys didn't just keep that in a traditional savings account that you get through your local bank or things like that. And kind of what that looks like for farmers and ranchers as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about saving and investing. And the one thing that I really want to point out is that if you have money sitting in a regular bank account or in your piggy bank or your sock drawer or your gun safe, you are losing money. So we know about inflation right now. I think everybody can tell you how much groceries cost. And so I think it's right now it's really understandable to say that every day that that dollar is not earning you something, it's losing value, right? I can't take that dollar and buy as much as I could yesterday with it. So when we look at savings and investing, we're looking at, especially for those long-term goals, putting that money into accounts that are super flexible. So when we talk about that, they can be withdrawn or borrowed against without penalty, right? So that's really important. So a lot of times when we talk about savings and investing, we talk about retirement accounts, and we have to be really careful with retirement accounts because in most cases, if you withdraw those funds before age 59 and a half, not only will you pay taxes on those funds, you will also pay a penalty on those funds. So this is where your team really comes into play. You need to work with your team to find accounts that allow you to, again, borrow or withdraw those funds without penalty. You might still pay taxes on them, but especially when you want to get away from that penalty. So that's really, really important. The other part about that is there are kind of two steps, really, when we talk about investing. It's selecting the right account type and then selecting the investment within that account. And your team will help you pick the account and the investment. So I'll give you a perfect example. I had been working with a financial advisor since I was in college, and we had started making contributions to an account called a Roth IRA. And so this is a retirement account, and it's a really interesting account because it's you put in after tax dollars. So I pay my taxes and then I make a contribution. What's really cool about that is because I already paid the taxes on it, I can withdraw those contributions at any time. So in 2024, if you're under the age of 50, you can contribute $7,000 to this account. If I turn around 6 months from now, I can withdraw that $7,000 without paying penalty and without paying taxes on those dollars. So this type of account was perfect for our needs. We could contribute, and then when the neighbor rolled us down the window and says, "Hey, you want to buy this?" Or in our case, unfortunately, the uncle passes away and we have to come up with a significant amount of money, we can do that. So once we start contributing to this Roth account, we now have contributions and we have earnings. Now, again, any money I put in is that contribution, but any money that earns is those earnings. So again, I can pull the contributions, but I can't pull the earnings off of that account until I'm over the age of 59 and a half without penalty. So this was the one of the main accounts that we were able to use, and it really just created that flexibility. The other cool part about it is there were some tax advantage if we use those funds for education or purchasing a home. And then if we leave those funds in until retirement, those earnings are tax-free in retirement. So really cool account. But again, that worked for us. It might not for you. And that's where building that really solid team around this information and saying, okay, we're trying to put away money for X, Y, and Z. What type of account do you recommend? And really look hard for, again, where you can either withdraw that money or borrow that money without penalty.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important that I think with this entire episode, everything that we are saying here, to remember that, you know what, this may have worked for Jessica and for other farmers and ranchers that she has worked with, or it may work for my operation, but it might not work for yours and it might not work for your goals. And so, with all of this, take it all with a grain of salt. We're here to educate, we're here to help you on this decision and just kind of like put these thoughts into your mind. But the biggest thing with this, go get a financial team. Go get a team of lawyers, go get a team of financial advisors, go get a CPA, go get like a tax advisor. Like all of these things you need to be pursuing to go and figure out, because you know what, we go, like you said, we go to the doctor, we go to the agronomist for advice, we go to the vet for advice. We need to be going to financial people for advice too. So with all of this and with all of these accounts that we're going to be spewing out, just kind of a little asterisk in there to remember that for yourself as well listening to this episode.
So will you go back and can we talk about, I don't think I answered the question about debt maybe as fully as as we want to. So can we go back and
Yeah.
let's talk about
Let's talk
debt.
about
Let's talk
debt.
about debt. Let's talk about debt. So first of all, I live in a rural area. There's a syndicated radio show that's on all the time, and the person who's on that show always says debt is dumb. And for farmers and ranchers, I could just cringe every time I hear that, and I cringe every time I hear farmers and ranchers call into their show. Not all debt is dumb. If you learn anything today, not all debt is dumb. Debt is a tool. And like any tool, if it is used properly, it can help us achieve our goals. So when we're looking at debt, we're looking at the kind of debt that there is. And really, it depends on how that debt is structured and what it's being used for. So, most of the time, when we talk about bad debt, we're talking about debt that either has an extraordinarily high interest rate or that you're using debt to purchase items that don't last very long. So, if we're using a credit card to purchase groceries, right? Those groceries are gone even before we pay off that credit card. That's what we would consider bad debt. You might hear it called consumer debt. However, if you have a debt obligation that is lower or an interest rate that is lower than, let's say, like 8 to 10%, and that is being used to purchase something that has a long life, like a tractor or farmland, that is good debt, right? So, what's happening with that kind of debt is we still have the use and the benefit of that asset as we pay off that debt. Now, we can have too much good debt. That is a possibility, right? But I think it's really hard when I hear traditional financial experts talk about debt and they talk about debt being dumb. It is not dumb. It is a tool. And so that's really, really important as we think about farmers and ranchers. You know, when I talk about being 7 figures in debt, is that fun? No. But it's the reality of agriculture today. With the asset values as high as they are, you are probably going to have to go into debt in order to be able to farm or to ranch. And we have to do that in a smart way. So, again, we're looking for lower interest rate loans, and we're making sure that we're not carrying too much debt on the farm operation. So, something that's really I'm really passionate about and I have a hard time with is that saying. And I just really want to encourage you as you're sitting here and you're thinking, gosh, is the debt that I have good or is the debt that I have bad? And we should ask ourselves, what is it being used for and what is the interest rate or the cost of that debt? The other thing I get asked a lot is um, maybe you're like us, right? Back in 2022 when we bought the farm, um, our interest rate was actually still pretty low, right? And I came from a debt-free lifestyle before that, and it's really hard to see that debt payment every day, right? And every once in a while, I just want to go write a big check and just to pay down some of that debt. But what you have to balance is knowing that the debt is at around 4%, but I'm earning on my investments between 8, 10, 12% on those investments. So should I take my money and pay off that 4% debt or should I invest it? And mathematically, the answer is to invest it. So that's really important as well as there's also a trade-off between holding debt and holding investments. Now, if all of my cash was sitting in my sock drawer, that decision and that discussion would be very, very different. But where I am actively investing, then I really have to look at it and say, no, my money is better spent by investing rather than trying to pay off that, especially super low right now, super low interest rate debt.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that even if you don't own a farm or ranch and you're just like looking at your debt in that lens too, of think about what your financial priorities are in this season. And if it's one of those things that a financial priority for you is investing in growing that generational wealth and not necessarily being asset rich and cash poor, you kind of need to look at it in that sense too. Could you talk a little bit about that asset rich and dirt, like not dirt poor, asset rich and cash poor, and kind of that philosophy on things? Because I feel like as farmers and ranchers, that's something we hear a lot of. Oh, well, you know what, I've got millions of dollars in all this land, but I've got $1,000 in my bank account this week or something like that.
Yeah, so we have to learn from the previous generations. And like you said, many of them invested every dime back into the farm or ranch, and they paid as little as possible in taxes. And the consequences of those actions are detrimental, especially when bringing in additional generations. So when it's time for them to slow down, or they're forced to step away from the business, like for health reasons, it's really, really difficult that they don't have savings to do that. Right. So, and I think that was part of our challenge. I think my husband was at this place where he's willing to step in, but his dad and his uncle, frankly, didn't have space. And a recent survey from the University of Nebraska showed that 60% of farmers and ranchers who are of retirement age don't believe that they have enough money to retire. Let that settle. It might not just be a control issue, right? It might not be they don't trust you. It might be that they physically don't have any other investments. Now, if they have a financial team, they should be going to that financial team and talking to them about what happens if I rent the property, what happens if we sell some assets, those kinds of things. But a lot of them look at their bank accounts and their investment accounts and their retirement accounts, if they have any, and there's not enough there to retire. So when I work with farmers and ranchers, I really want them to think about a couple of different things. And the first is to separate the business from the personal finances. You need separate bank accounts, you need separate credit cards, and you might even go the step farther of using something like an entity to also separate out the risk of those businesses from the personal finances. So start with that step of separating business from personal. Then, as we move forward, we need to actually budget for family living expenses. And this is something that I see a lot of farmers and ranchers not doing, is they are not saying, this is how much the operation is going to contribute to the family living, and we're going to build that into the cost of production. And right now, especially for grain producers, as their belts get a little bit tighter, this is really important because your banker is going to pick on your family living expenses probably first. And if you don't have it budgeted and you can't justify that budget, it's probably the first thing that's going to be cut. So going in and honestly looking at what can the farm or the ranch contribute? What should it be contributing in terms of what I would call non-discretionary spending, and budgeting that in and letting that banker know, yes, we have a handle on the family living costs, and this is truly what it takes. And I think it's baffling to a lot of people how much family living expenses actually are. Recently, I heard a banker say $25,000 per adult and $10,000 per child in family living expenses. Again, might not be true for you, but if you don't know, it would be really important for you to go back and to start separating out and sifting out that information so that you know what it really takes. Once we have the family living expenses budgeted out as a family, we also need to think about what that budget looks like. So there's those non-discretionary expenses, which I would call needs. Then we would have the wants, which are the things that you want to do. Those are the family vacations, those are the holidays, those kinds of things. And then we also have our savings bucket. So I like to think about them as buckets. So again, those buckets were needs, wants, and then savings or investments. And really looking at those and saying, okay, these are the things we can't cut. These are the things we need to be really thoughtful about what we're spending on. And these are the things we absolutely need to save. Now, again, thinking about traditional financial advisors, they use a rule of thumb. And that rule of thumb is 50% on needs, 30% on wants, and 20% on savings and investments. Good place to start if you have nothing. But I'll give you an example of my husband and I. We were well over 20% in savings and investments when we first got married. We were putting every penny, every dime we could in that savings bucket. The harder one is that wants bucket, and especially if you have kids, right? We're doing sports, we're doing school things. We've got, it's right towards the end of the school year. We're doing teacher appreciation gifts and getting ready for summer fun. And I think I don't want you to restrict what goes in that wants bucket, but we have to be really thoughtful about it. If you're a livestock showing family, we have to be intentional about that wants bucket. But we can budget for those kinds of expenses as long as we know that they exist. So again, break it down into 3 buckets and figure out what mix of those buckets works for you in the season of life that you're in.
Yeah, that is so important to kind of discuss and talk about too, is just the mindset that you have around that money and where those money's going and what your priority is in that season. And you know what? Like Jessica's story that she shared, in their first season of marriage, it was everything was towards savings. And you know what? In the season that you may be in right now, everything is towards fun, or everything is towards living expenses or something like that. Like, it's just, you have to, I think the first part of it is acknowledging and understanding where your money is going, and not just kind of like looking at it in a fear factor, of looking at your bank statement every month and like, oh, well, I guess we got to do this now. No, like, have control over your money. Don't let your money have control over you.
Well, and I think it gives you permission to do things. So, like, while
Yep.
we were saving, we still, one of the things in our kind of wants bucket was that we were still going to go on dates. And that was huge for us. We were still going to go on vacation. That was big for us. But we backed off on other things. So my husband is big into cars and to motorcycles. So during that time, we weren't buying as many parts. I'm big into clothes and those kinds of things. We budgeted it, but we still had permission to spend when we wanted to. And I think that's really, really important, that it doesn't have to be rice and beans and rice. It doesn't have to be like, eh, what was that? What was that diet that was all the rage? Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be so restrictive as like one of these crazy, what is it, 75 hard things, right? Like, that's not sustainable. That is so not sustainable. When you think about your budget, like one of those crazy diets, it's not sustainable. So allowing yourself that opportunity to say, we're going to budget for the things that we want to do. And, like I said, whatever that means to you gives you the opportunity to say, this is important to us. We want to do it. We want to go out and do these things. Right. And so that's what's really important about that.
Yeah, for sure. It's so important that you're just real with yourself in that situation and in that season. We kind of touched on the Roth IRA accounts and that part of investing. We've touched on debt, all of those different sorts of things. I would love to hear kind of like about the other accounts and things like that, because like you said, if you have your money just sitting in your gun safe, or if you have it even sitting in even a traditional savings account that's with your bank that is getting a like 0.1% interest rate back or something like that, you are losing money. And it's so important that people kind of realize that, especially if they're doing business with their small town bankers that maybe don't have access to high yield savings accounts or just different things like that. I'd love to hear kind of the other accounts that you guys utilized, and how we should be utilizing them.
Yeah. So again, go back to your team. But some of the accounts we used, we actually opened a high yield savings account. Um, in the past, we've had a money market account. And then we also utilize a 401k. It's called a solo 401k, that has a loan option in it. But again, you need to go back to your team, ask them about those accounts. When you invest in those accounts, it's not just the account type, it's also making sure that you select the investments within inside that account. Right now, high yield savings accounts are kind of like all the rage. They're in the personal finance world. They're the kind of the sexy thing right now because they're earning between 4 and 5%, which is pretty high. Um, but you could also look at things like bonds, maybe short term or long term bonds. But again, get that team together, make sure you understand what the consequences of putting your money in that type of account are, and that you're following the rules of that type of account. So, for example, with a bond, um, I've got a bond and it's a year long bond, so I can't touch that money for a year. but we were comfortable with putting that money in that kind of investment for right now because we don't foresee a situation in the next year where we would need that amount of money. Now, is all of our money in that kind of investment account? No. We have, and we should probably talk about this. We have diversification, right? We're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. We have not only different accounts, but also my husband and I have different investment advisors who are handling our individual retirement accounts separately from each other. Now, again, you might not be in a community or a town where that's possible, but banking is so free now with the internet and the possibility of opening an account, even if they don't have a branch in your hometown, it's fully possible. So think about what's out there and look for people that you know, you like, and you trust. I personally like to use actual physical advisors rather than robo advisors because I like to pick up the phone and call someone. Still a little old school in that manner. Um, and it really makes sure that things actually happen the way that they're supposed to happen. So again, talk to them about the different account types that are out there with your long-term goals. One thing we haven't talked about with farmers and ranchers in particular is emergency funds. So, an emergency fund basically says, if I blow a transmission on my pickup, where am I going to pull that money from? And Americans at this point, finding $600 is really, really difficult for like 75% of most Americans. So, getting an emergency fund built up, and that's that liquid cash. So, that's I guess you could count the sock drawer. What's in your sock drawer, what's in your regular bank account, and then what's in a really open liquid account like a high yield savings account, and seeing whether or not you would have enough money to cover that kind of expense. Most advisors recommend 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund in some sort of liquid account like that. And I fully agree with that, especially for farmers and ranchers. That's where when something goes wrong, you can immediately go pull it and you don't have to borrow to cover that emergency. So an emergency fund is something that we need to have. We need to have cash available to us immediately. And again, it's probably split between the cash you have on hand, some sort of regular bank account, and then probably that high yield savings account or money market account.
Yeah, it's so important to talk about because I feel like that's one thing that farmers and ranchers maybe are a little bit foreign to these days. They are just accustomed to when something goes wrong, we just put it on the operational debt or we go get another operational loan or something like that. Whereas that 3 to 6 months of living expenses, it doesn't just have to be used for your family living expenses or things like that. If something goes awry and you get hurt or just different things like that, it can be used to go and replace a part on that tractor when it breaks or something like that so that you don't have to go get any bad debt to fix that because that is one thing that you can't run your operation without. It's not we have a choice to fix this. It's this has to get fixed if we want to eat next week type of thing. And I think it just takes a lot of pressure off of that we can fix this with our liquid cash and we're still going to eat next week or something like that.
Yeah, and I think it goes on both sides. I think it goes on the personal side that you have some sort of reserve
Mm-hmm.
emergency funds, and then also on the business side. So your banker, if they're looking at your balance sheet, is looking for that kind of liquidity to exist. The hard part about the business side is, do you have to liquidate, let's say, corn to make that repair? So having some more cash on hand when prices spike, translating some of that grain or whatever you have on hand into cash can also help with that piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to remember that we can't do it the way that we've always done it or the way that our parents did it or things like that. And if you are in a situation where you are still working with your parents or your family on the operation, it can be really hard to have these discussions and these conversations. But I think it's also just remembering that coming at it with a lot of grace and a lot of love, that this is how they know that they've done it. But we have the worldwide internet that we've been able to learn a bunch of these things about personal finance and operational just running of operations and businesses and things that our parents didn't have access to. They only had access to the knowledge that they were surrounded with in their community, whether that be their bankers or their Papa Joe at the feed store or something like that. Like those are the only people that they had to have these conversations with and kind of expand their knowledge base. So when you are coming back to the family farmer range, I think it's important to just approach this with a lot of grace too.
Absolutely.
So, with a lot of this, there is kind of a stigma around agriculture and stuff like that. That, like as we've mentioned before, that you have to be asset rich and cash poor, or you have to like run your operation this certain way, or there's just a lot of stigmas around finance and agriculture and running operations. And I would love to hear kind of your opinions and your thoughts on the key to success with all of this and what that kind of looks like, and the kind of overarching question that everyone probably has listening to this, like, okay, how do I, like, what do I do, how do I do this, how do I make my operation better than it's ever been before?
So I think the biggest key to success is realizing for a lot of us, we're running multi-million dollar businesses and we need to pay ourselves. I don't know of another industry where CEOs don't pay themselves. I don't. And so that's really interesting to me in agriculture. And you need to ask your advisors about paying not only yourself, but potentially also your spouse and your children. There's a few reasons why I think this needs to be a huge mindset shift in agriculture. First and foremost, we want to qualify for Social Security. So paying $0 in taxes means that we're also not qualifying for Social Security. And Social Security is not only a benefit in retirement, but if you become disabled or you die, there's also benefits associated with that. Now, are those benefits the most wonderful thing on the face of the planet? No, but it's something. So qualifying for Social Security is one thing. So making sure we pay enough taxes to qualify for that. When we talk about paying ourselves, our spouses, and our kids, there's potential tax deductions for that. So, again, taking advantage of the tax code. And the tax code doesn't just allow you to go and buy iron, right? It has all these other things that are available tools for farmers and ranchers. And so, see whether or not that's a way to take advantage of the tax code would be paying yourself, your spouse, or your children. The last thing is when we pay ourselves or we pay our family members, we can take advantage of those tax advantage retirement accounts. So let's go back to paying our kids in particular. First of all, we can pay our kids at a younger age than most industries, as long as we are paying them a reasonable wage for the work that they do. As long as our kids have earned income, they then qualify for that Roth IRA. So you could be 15, 16, 17 years old as a child contributing to a Roth IRA. Think about how powerful that is. So when they get 25, 30, 40 years old, even if they don't make any additional contributions, that money is continuing to grow and they can withdraw those contributions when it's time to go to school, or it's time to buy their first piece of equipment, or it's time to buy their first cows. So it's really this amazing opportunity when we can start taking advantage of those retirement accounts. And again, we're going to look for flexible accounts that either allow us to borrow or withdraw funds without penalty. So work with your team of advisors on who can I pay? How much can I pay them? And then what can we do with that money to set them up for a brighter future?
Yeah, paying yourself is so important. So, so important. And it goes right back to what we talked about with separating personal finances from your business finances and setting up a kind of either a quarterly consistent or a yearly consistent, like this is how much I'm going to pay myself, and then figuring out how that goes in monthly. You have a wife or kids or someone who has maybe potentially has a job in town and they bring home a biweekly paycheck or a weekly paycheck. You should be basing your business off to do the same in that sense as well. So with that, we kind of touched at the end on investing and what that kind of looks like, investing with your kids, investing with yourself, all of those things. What are some pieces of advice that you have as far as setting yourself up for really great success with investing?
So the biggest key to success is time. So if you're thinking about putting money away, start today. Again, the younger we can start investing, the more time that money has to grow and the more advantages that we get from putting that money into that account. I think a lot of times we think about investing as locking it away, but again, we're going to look for those flexible accounts and we're going to make sure that we select the right account type and the right investments for that account. And we're going to give it time. We don't know whether we're going to need that money in a year or, in our case, in 5 years or 10 years, but we're going to give that money time to grow and to work on our behalf rather than sitting and deteriorating. So that's what's important when it comes to investing is giving it time and working with your team to pick the right accounts and the right investments.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing behind investing is there was this stigma when I was younger, that you had to have X amount of money before you started investing in your Roth IRA or 401k or anything like that. Guys, you do not. You absolutely do not. I do not care if you start with $5 a month. Like you sacrifice one thing to find $5 that month and go put that in an account because guess what? If you are 18 years old and you invest that $5 now, it is like, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but if you are 60 and you invest today the same $5, that person that's 18, compound interest, hello, it is going to make them hundreds of thousands of more dollars than it is going to make you at the age of 60 when you're at that retirement age. And so it's just so important to just start. It doesn't matter if it's something super small, super minuscule. If you have a 9 to 5 job, start talking to your advisors to take that out of your paycheck so you don't even know that it's there. I'm a big proponent of that, of like trying to separate out your account so that you don't even see it coming in the first place to that spending account. So whether it be something that like, yes, you need to go find your advisory team and all of those things. But if you need something actionable to start today, go get an Acorns account or something and have one of those robo investors do it for you and just start setting up a $10 a week or $10 a month investment and just get money in there and get it in the stock market in some way, shape, or form because time is your best friend in this. And the longer you let it go by the wayside of like, oh, I'm going to do that next month. Oh, I'm going to do that next month. Well, all of a sudden you're 5 years down the road and you're getting serious about your investing. And then you're like, well, darn it. I wish 5 years ago I would have started with that $10 because now I'd have X amount in my retirement account where now I'm starting at zero and now I've got to contribute double at this age what I could have contributed when I was younger and it turned out to be the same amount of money.
Well, and I also think it's a lot easier to cut expenses when you're young. Like, I don't know
Yes.
about you, but like in college I could live off of like, 99-cent tacos, right? And now I can't do that, right? Like you have that lifestyle creep. And so if you build in savings and investments into your lifestyle of, right, my paycheck hits and then my savings go out, that automation, like you said, really changes kind of the game for you. And it really makes it to where you don't notice it. Like it's kind of like set it and forget it. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's part of it. And then when you need it, it's like, oh, it's here. And again, if
Yep.
we selected the right account types and we have those flexible account types, it's like, oh, sweet, right? Like I don't have to panic about I need 10,000, I need 20,000. Like it's sitting there, it's waiting for you. And you didn't miss it when you were 20, but it's there when you're 40. It makes so much difference in what you can do later in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you're in your 20s right now and you're just like thinking like, "Oh, like I'm going to have to like start paying for college and all of these things." Like there's a difference between like putting your savings in a high yield savings account. I think that that's really really great if you're looking for like your emergency fund or short-term financial goals. High yield savings accounts are great. But outside of your short-term financial goals, if you have goals like I would say probably a year or 2 years out, those need to be in higher investment accounts that can get that 8 to 10% return rather than that 4 to 5% return because I mean your money's there, it might as well be working for you rather than working against you if you're going to be saving it for those long-term goals and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And with that, another option that we kind of haven't touched on a ton, and I'd love to dive deeper into, is life insurance policies and what those can look like. Because life insurance policies don't just have to be used if, God forbid, something happens to someone. Like, obviously, that's the main purpose of them, but there's some really great ways that you can kind of sneak in life insurance policies as well.
Yeah, so when we were going through those initial discussions with dad and uncle, one of the things that we looked at possibly doing was using a life insurance policy. So, where my husband and I would be the owner and beneficiary of the policy, and then we would own that policy on either uncle or dad. And what would happen if that scenario played out would be when one of them passed, we would then have the money to buy out siblings and cousins. Unfortunately for us, it didn't work out, but I still believe that life insurance policies can work. And the reason it didn't work out for us is because they were not insurable. So that's one of those things that the people that you're insuring have to be insurable. But for agriculture, life insurance policies can be very, very interesting. So the situation that I explained is called a life insurance backed by sell agreement. Basically, we would sign an agreement both with dad and with uncle to say, at your passing, we would purchase your assets for X number of dollars. We would then go and buy a life insurance policy on them that would be equal to the amount of that agreement. And basically, at their death, we would then have the funds to buy out their estate. And it's a really interesting tool. It works well, especially if you happen to be in a scenario where that oldest generation is still younger. If they're in their 50s or 60s, it can work out pretty well. Or let's say we're in a scenario where it's like you and your siblings, right? Where we're younger, right? So again, we can use that life insurance backed by sell agreement to make sure that we have money when we need it, which would be at the death of that key person. So that's one way to use a life insurance policy. My husband and I do have life insurance policies right now, and those life insurance policies are to cover our debt. So when we ended up buying the farm, we also bought a life insurance policy. Um, Almost equal to the amount of debt that we were now carrying. And the thought process behind that, and the life insurance policy, there's one on me and there's one on my husband, is that if one of us were to die, the other could still handle the debt load at that point. So again, I work in town, I work for Extension, and if my salary were to go away in that scenario, right? If I passed away, my husband would be able to pay off a significant amount of debt, basically based on the contribution that I'm making to the farm or the ranch. So that is what we're using there. It's a term life insurance policy. It's a more affordable policy. It works really well for us because we're both younger, we're both insurable, and we're actually at the point where we're starting to decrease the size of that policy as we pay off that debt. So that expense lowers as the debt amount lowers. Now, it is an additional expense. We are paying a premium for that insurance policy, just like we pay a premium for our health insurance. But heaven forbid something happened to one of us, the other can pay off some debt and still be able to successfully farm without the other person. So, life insurance is something that I encourage families to look into. Again, we can look at it in that buy sell agreement space, but even if you're not in that buy sell scenario, just looking at it from the terms of protecting other family members if something were to happen to you is really, really important. So, life insurance is something that I talk to a lot of people about. Now, life insurance is complicated. There's lots of different types of life insurance policies. I personally don't like to see life insurance policies used as an investment. That is, if I'm going to invest in something, I'm going to go and do it in one of these tax advantages accounts that has some flexibility to it and that we can access. So I don't like to see the use of a whole life insurance policy for an investment vehicle. But I do like to see it potentially used in those two scenarios that I discussed. So a term life insurance policy to cover debt, or a whole life or permanent life insurance policy to back a buy sell agreement that exists. Now, in our scenario, I told you that we had some uninsurable people. So you have to make sure that whoever you're insuring is insurable. And then you have to think about the premium and whether or not the premium is viable. If the premium is too high, it might not be worth it. So what we did was we looked at the ability to invest that money that we would be paying in a premium versus purchasing the life insurance policy and seeing basically where the break even was in order for us to be able to decide between the life insurance policy and investing. So again, get a rock star team around you, have them work through those scenarios with you, but make sure that you're asking about life insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all just kind of goes back to that one driving force of this conversation is have a rock star team behind you. And if you have to like go through this process with an interview mindset, you are interviewing these people just as much as they should be you. And so it's asking those right questions. It's sitting down and making sure that they're truly going to be on your team and everything like that. I would love to hear kind of your advice on if someone is sitting here and they're kind of like, okay, well, we haven't done any of this, or they're a child inheriting an operation that has a bunch of debt, or has maybe it's not all good debt, maybe it's also just like living expenses debt and things like that, or they're walking back to the family operation with their family. What's the first step? Like the first thing that these people need to do, what's that, and what does that kind of look like?
Get a hold of the books. Get a hold of the books and don't default to the female member of your family to know and to understand the books. For all you women listening there, make your husband understand the books, or your boyfriend, or your brother. Um, your business, the story of your business is written in the finances. And we can see what's happening within a business. So we can look at several balance sheets. Let's say we have 3 or 4 years worth of balance sheets. We can look at cash flows and we can start to understand what's happening in the business. And then we can look at it and say, where are we? Where have we been? And where do we want to go? And what changes can we make? So there are things that are out of our control. I live in Western Nebraska where it hails. And when I talk about hail, I talk about grapefruit baseball sized hail. So I can tell you by looking at our financial documents, oh, that had to be a hail year, or something, dramatic happened, because we can see it in the numbers based on the production, right? So get into your finances, understand what's happening. Whoever's been doing the books, whether that was a professional or a family member, have them walk you through the process of what they're doing and really start to understand what's going on in that business. If you don't have that knowledge, or you don't have that, I would really encourage you to go to your local university extension professionals. There are people like me across the country who sit down with farmers and ranchers every day and look at their books every day. And we have no skin in the game. I'm not your banker. I'm not I have nothing but my unbiased opinion of what's happening in your business, and I can help you work through, okay, here's what your cash flow looks like. Here's what your balance sheet looks like. This is what a banker sees when they look at your business. Here's some ways that we could improve it. And they can tell a lot from those documents. So if you're just coming in and maybe you don't know where you fit yet, maybe you don't. Ask to see the books, to work in the books. Maybe you have the job of working with the tax accountant that year. Like take the tax load. Everybody hates taxes, right? Takes the tax load off somebody else's shoulders and say, I want to understand how this is done. And that will give you access to understand. Now you're not being nosy, right? You're just trying to understand the business. The second piece to that, once you kind of are starting to understand the financial documents, would be to ask whether or not you can go and meet with those advisors. So ask, can I come with you for the loan renewal at the banker? Can I come with you to talk to the attorney? Can I come with you to talk to the agronomist? And start to build those relationships with those professionals, because outside of the financial team, there's all of these other advisors that will influence your finances. If that agronomist is giving you the Cadillac of fertilizer packages when corn is $4, that might not be the right step financially. And we have to ask those harder questions of, based on where prices are currently at, is that a realistic yield goal? Is that a realistic package for us to be looking at? And really start to ask those questions and understand. You'll understand who the person is, you'll understand the types of information that they need, and you'll understand the recommendations that they're providing. So those would be the two things that I would do. Get in, try to understand what's going on in the finances, and start meeting with those advisors so you kind of know who you like and who you don't, and who you want to work with and who you don't.
Yes, absolutely. That is such amazing advice. And we have had just a really amazing conversation today and talked about a lot of things from different investing policies to debt and everything else in between, and just overall finances of the farm and farming operations and ranches and stuff like that. And like we said, it's the biggest thing about this is I hope that everyone is leaving this conversation wanting to go get that amazing team of people behind them, because whether it be reaching out to your local extension agents or just sitting down with your banker or your parents, or just figuring out the next steps of getting that really great team behind you, because guess what? They are so worth the investment. Like, you can sit down with an investment advisor, and with their complete amazing knowledge of help, they're going to be able to double your investments, if not more than what I could do on my own. Because guess what? I don't know the stock market. That thing, I could learn the stock market, but is that really how I want to spend my time, or something like that? So it's one of those things that, find that really great team of people behind you, start investing, just get your skin in the game right now. And you never know where the future is going to take you. But I know Jessica and I have talked about maybe doing even more episodes of this and diving into these discussions further, stuff like that. So if y'all like this episode, please let us know. And if you have any questions, I know Jessica's always open for their DMs and everything. But I would love to kind of hear your one last piece of advice. The one question I ask everyone that comes on this podcast: what is a piece of advice that you have for the next generation of agriculture?
So I've tried to think about how you wrap this into a package. And recently I read a book by Morgan Housel. It's called The Psychology of Money. And he had a quote in there that said, "Savings is the hedge against life's inevitable ability to surprise the hell out of you at the worst possible moment." And for us, when my husband's uncle passed away, that was our worst possible moment. It's the middle of COVID. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know whether or not we would be able to buy out his heirs. We didn't know if we could hold the mantle of being the fourth generation of that operation. But we had savings. And farmers and ranchers completely understand hedging, right? We hedge our grain, we hedge our cattle. How are you hedging against life? And that's by saving and investing and getting a handle on your money. So my advice to you is to start saving. Start somewhere. Start with that dollar. Start with that $5. Start automating those investments and finding that team of professionals who can help you achieve your goals through savings and investments.
Yes, I couldn't have put it any better. Any better, Jessica. That was amazing advice. And I will definitely be linking that book down below for all of our viewers as well. If you want to go get in on some more of that advice, I will link all of Jessica's links. So whether that be her website or just her personal social medias, anything like that, if you have any questions, please throw them our ways. We would love to dive into some more of these topics a little bit deeper, and all of those sorts of things, prepping the next generation of agriculture and prepping all of you guys for that taking over of the family operation and farmer ranch. And you know what? These conversations are hard. Money isn't the most fun thing to talk about with your parents or your family or stuff like that. And we fully, fully, fully understand that. Like, it truly isn't. But I hope that this conversation just truly allowed you to sit down and learn something that you didn't get to learn from your parents, or you didn't get to learn from school, or just different things like that. So thank you, Jessica. I have thoroughly enjoyed our time today, and I know that I got a bunch of really great information out of this podcast, and I'm hoping that the listeners did as well. So if you have any questions, please hit up Jessica and or myself, and look out for maybe something else in the future, diving into some of these topics a little deeper. And for all of you listeners out there, we will see you on another episode of The Next Generation next week.